In just 4 days, this long election cycle will be over. When the dust settles and the ballots are counted, how will history remember the 2016 race? And politics have been fodder for film since almost the beginning. We look at reflections of this year's campaign through a cinematic lens. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our special pre-election show. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Andy Keats, reporter at Voice of San Diego. Hi, Andy.
How you doing, Mark?
Good to have you here today. Sarah Libby, who's managing editor at Voice. How are you, Sarah?
Hey, Mark.
Good to see you today. And Beth Accomando, arts and culture reporter for KPBS. Hi, Beth.
Hi, Mark.
Well, perhaps the only thing Americans of all political persuasions can agree on in this insane political year is that Tuesday, Election Day, can't come soon enough. We've had endless pants-on-fire declarations from candidates, violence at rallies, gutter-level accusations, meddling from foreigners, recordings of vulgar boasts, and, of course, mountains of questionable emails. And let's start with an overview. Now, it looks like Hillary Clinton is still ahead in the polls. That's tightened, though, lately, and who knows what's going to happen come Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, judging from the best you can see from what they have available nationally is that looks like she's got about a 3-point lead, which puts her within the place where if there's a polling error for some reason that she could lose, but she'd have to be considered the favorite.
Okay, so just working on that assumption, she becomes America's first female president, obviously follows America's first black president, if that were to be the case. What will she be facing regarding Congress, Supreme Court, and political fortunes in general?
Well, they're not really hiding their cards, are they? They've already said, things like, we don't know that we have to hold a vote to confirm any of her Supreme Court justices. Don't
have to bring it back up to 9 justices.
We've already heard talk about lingering indictments or potential impeachment proceedings. I don't think there's any real reason to believe that she'll be elected and immediately people will say, well, maybe we got a little overheated during the campaign. Let's see if we can work together.
Some pundit said last week maybe she'll be giving testimony at a committee in her inauguration gown. So We'll see how that all breaks out. All right, we'll set the feds aside for now. We have talked a lot about state and local measures on this show. I do want to review a couple, though, here before Election Day. Will voters finally decide on Tuesday if the Chargers leave San Diego once and for all?
That's the right question, because so reporters are famously bad pundits and prognosticators, but I think there's pretty widespread agreement from anybody who's been involved in the issue that the Chargers don't even think they're going to get to 67% and get the stadium that they want. So the question is, what else is being decided? If they get over 50, 55, if you listen to Dean Spanos, then maybe they would be encouraged that there's a deal that could happen and they'll stick around and start negotiations on a new, different deal. If they're much lower than that, below 45, say, then maybe that sends a different message. These are things that Dean Spanos has said in the media. So I think the thing to watch with Measure C in the Chargers Stadium is not whether we actually approve the project that they are discussing, but instead what message we send them about whether we're ever going to build them a publicly subsidized stadium.
Right, and maybe we've seen the last publicly financed stadium in California, who knows. Also on the ballot here, Sandag's asking to raise a half-cent sales tax here, and you folks had a story, very interesting story, of all the billions that didn't kind of come in from the last time here in the current half-cent jump in that. What do you think about that for transit and roads going forward many years?
So yeah, it's a 40-year measure. I mean, once again, it's the same thing. 67% is a high bar for any measure to clear. Unlike last time when Transnet passed in 2004, there really was no organized opposition here. In this case, the Democratic Party has opposed it. So if you see their slate mailer that says all the candidates they want you to vote for, they say do not vote, they say vote no on Measure A. So, that makes it different than their previous sales tax proposals. The thing you get to is that we have reported that if you look inside their forecast that gets them to the $18 billion total that they've suggested they're going to be able to raise with this tax, and that total is the thing that they use to get the list of projects that people are essentially voting on.
Yeah, a whole goodie list for everybody. Yeah.
That depends on the assumption that San Diegans in the coming decades will spend more per person than they ever have going back to the 1970s, and substantially more, over 30% more
Doesn't factor in economic downturns, all sorts of things that could happen.
Yeah, so well above the historic average, which is pretty aggressive. It's a pretty ambitious assumption that the economy is going to continue growing that much, that we're going to continue getting that much richer, that it's going to translate into a lot of sales, and that those sales will turn into revenue that they can use to build all those projects.
All right. Well, let's move to a couple of big state propositions before we get off this segment. One is it looks like voters appear supporting legalizing marijuana here. What might we see with that, Sarah? You got any ideas?
Yeah, I think if it goes through, we're going to see a lot of kind of patchwork work as far as cities go. I think a lot of small cities, even in San Diego County, have indicated that they don't want it.
So they'll just pass on it. They don't have to.
Whether it passes or not. In San Diego, we have a measure on the ballot to tax those businesses if they become legalized, so that San Diego can kind of share in some of the profit from that. But I do think we're going to see a lot of kind of patchwork legislation spring up in terms of it's okay here, but these cities don't want it.
Kind of the old idea of the dry county in the Prohibition era, where some counties had alcohol and some did not. And so, yeah, it could be very interesting to see as we work out. Well, the one other state proposition before I wanted to shift gears a little bit is there's two actually competing state propositions regarding the death penalty in this case. I think the latest polls say neither one is doing very well. Maybe we'll be left with the status quo.
Right, and I've even seen polls that indicate people either support them both or don't support either of them, which is interesting because they're completely they do exactly the opposite. One would end the death penalty, and one would seek to speed up appeals, possibly hastening executions. So it could be that we're left with the status quo, which is really in limbo right now because a judge has ruled that California's execution protocol is unconstitutional, so we haven't been putting people to death, even though it's technically still the law of the land in California. Okay, well, that'll be another one to watch on a very busy Tuesday night coming up. Well, it's been nearly 2 years since campaigning for president began, and once developer Donald Trump entered the race, blasting undocumented immigrants as rapists and murderers and promising to build a wall along the Mexico border, the nature of campaigning changed forever. On the eve of Election Day, I want to turn to some of the strange, profoundly different ways this political season has played out. Let's start with the rise of Donald Trump. Now, he bested a field of 16 Republican candidates. Most of them had enjoyed political victory. They'd long had experience in office. How did he do this? Did he size it up, Sarah, as a reality show? And he's pretty good at reality shows. Well, I think there's something to that, and I can't believe I'm about to quote, I think, Scott Baio, who is a Trump supporter. But he said something that I think puts it really well, is that he speaks like I do, or he speaks in terms that I can understand. And I think there's actually a lot to that, in that he says things that really resonate with people. I mean, it's much easier to do when you don't care about facts at all. But I do think that there's something to the fact that he can communicate in a way that really resonates with people, in a way that people who are maybe career politicians, they don't have that ability as much.
Well, I think there was a strategic misfire by the rest of the field.
The Republican field back then.
Yes, they were all very accomplished. They were veteran legislators, but they were
with the exception of Carson and Fiorina, but all of them, they've been senators and governors.
And there was a lot of them. It was a very crowded field, and so you had Donald Trump with a persistent lead, but never a majority, and everybody else was thinking, not how do I knock Donald Trump out, but how do I win? And it created this collective action problem where no individual candidate ever thought it was to their advantage to start attacking Trump and potentially alienate those 36% of his voters, which was more than anybody else had.
But he needed those folks.
And so they were in this position where no one was attacking him. Right. So he went through, a lengthy stretch until he was banking votes before anybody ever said a bad word about him. And I think basically they all doomed each other through their inaction. Now,
we touched on this a moment ago, and I wanted to bring Beth into the discussion because we were talking about this in the newsroom this morning, but all politicians spin and some of them flat out lie, and they rate these things now, and Hillary Clinton is kind of actually doing a little better than Bernie Sanders when it comes to people calling her pants on fire or truthful statements or somewhere in between. Trump is off the charts. And Beth, you were saying because his followers just uniquely don't trust the media. So anything that's reported and said that that's just a flat out lie, or that's just, you know, not true, or it's 180 degrees from what is reality, he gets away with that. And what was your thoughts on that?
Well, the thing that's interesting about him is that he doesn't care about the facts. He says whatever he wants. His statements change every day. And when the mainstream media and when kind of thoughtful voters look at it and say, like, oh, well, all we need to do is fact check him, let people know what the truth is, and then they'll realize that they either need to not vote for him or that they need to understand his point of view. But
or even show a clip of him saying, yes, you did say that. Here's a clip.
They're totally misjudging his fan base. And I say fan base as opposed to supporters, but his fan base because they don't care what the facts are. And if you fact check them, if CNN fact checks them or PBS does, they don't trust those media outlets. They don't see them as reliable. They call them, you know, they're liberal controlled or they're Hillary supporters, whatever. So to fact check it only, I think, firms up their support for him. They're going like, see, he's exactly right. They're telling us that he's lying and we can't trust them.
And Andy?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that will be interesting to see going forward is in all number of races from, you know, locally and up and down the ballot going forward, if candidates now realize that they don't need to react to perceived gaffes the way that they typically have. Whether you could, like, you know, a lot of these things that you know, a guy like Mitt Romney or John McCain would have scrambled to correct and clean up.
Well, it's a bad story in a paper. We got to do something about that.
Do something about it. And realize, like, that stuff, maybe it doesn't matter very much. You know, why apologize? I mean, he has made a habit of just never apologizing. And in fact, taking every attempt to think, but that somebody makes to make him think he should apologize, to go on the attack even further. And so I wonder if you'll see that in politics now.
Well, I want to take this theme, and all of you folks are very active in social media, professionally, personally. I want to take this theme to a related notion here of being able to work around the conventional media, where you don't have to worry about that big gotcha story in the newspaper, or local, or Washington Post, or New York Times. It's all being fought out now on social media. And how has that, in this campaign, really kind of changed things, this phenomenon?
I think we probably all have like those cousins and uncles who post things on Facebook and you can say, well, that's just actually objectionably not true, and they mistakenly believe that it is. And it's easier to not know what is right when it comes to things like Facebook. It's easy to see something that looks like a news article and actually isn't. But yeah, I think you can pick and choose your news now as opposed to just getting it from the local paper and maybe the New York Times.
Or the major TV networks now.
Exactly.
There's all sorts of alternatives.
And so it makes it a little harder to decipher, you know, what's a legitimate news report. But I think people should probably be getting their news from all kinds of sources and judging based on a breadth of coverage as opposed to just cherry picking things from social media.
Right. Well, and then
I was going to say,
Beth,
is
go ahead.
because you have so many sources of information now with the internet and with all the things on Twitter and Facebook, the problem is that people tend to gravitate to whatever reinforces their point of view. So they're not getting the facts, or they're not getting even-handed reporting. And you know, back when I was a kid growing up and you had 3 networks to watch on television, everybody was kind of working from kind of the same basic source of information. But now you can find any point of view that supports yours and completely ignore everything else.
Well, this, and of course we're talking about social media being a big change in this coverage and in our culture here. Let's talk about TV a little bit. It famously changed the way we covered politics, and let's go back particularly to the 1960 debates. Now, debate was a big theater this year, and in 1960 we had the first televised debate between Republican Richard Nixon, of course, Democrat John Kennedy, and that's seen as a watershed moment. A lot of people thought Nixon won if they listened on radio, but TV had a whole different portrayal there. Let's get a bite from that debate in 1960.
Let us understand throughout this campaign that his motives and mine are sincere. I know what it means to be poor. I know what it means to see people who are unemployed. I know Senator Kennedy feels as deeply about these problems as I do.
Well, the Vice President and I came to the Congress together, 1946. We both served in the Labor Committee. I've been there now for 14 years, the same period of time that he has. So that our experience in government is comparable. I think Mr. Nixon is an effective leader of his party. I hope he would grant me the same.
All right, in that short bit, they both said nice things about each other. Now let's contrast that. We're going to have an exchange between Trump and Clinton from this year.
From everything I see, has no respect for this person.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
It's a
You nasty
security
woman.
trust fund.
All right, please let Mr. Trump speak.
He's unfit, and he proves it every time
You
he
are
talks.
the one that's unfit.
Wow, come a long way from 1960 just based on those bites there. Yeah. So are we going to see this going forward? I mean, speculate a little bit here. Is this just change the game, the way people react to each other and how the rallies have been conducted and the slogans and the T-shirts and all the nasty stuff and the nasty woman crack, everything else that's gone on?
I'm a little torn because I think we sort of do this to some extent in every election is, oh, this is beyond the pale and this time things are really bad and nasty. And elections have always been savage. They always have. And we seem to forget that. That said, this does seem, this really does seem
a little more Jerry Springer this year than usual.
Yeah, a little more Jerry Springer than.
And what Jerry Springer taught everyone was that there's no more shame on television. It's like those shows allowed you to like reveal anything and it was okay. And that's kind of what you feel like is going on.
And there's an audience for it. I mean, the debates drew big ratings here, Andy.
I think Trump's a unique.
I think it's fair to say you're right.
I'm not that worried about it. I mean, I don't think we'll have debates in the future where people literally say, I'm rubber and you're glue, whatever you say, sticks to me. Because that's what Trump said twice in that clip you just played.
Right. That's right. That's remarkable. Pretty much what he did. All right. Well, we will now go to a different aspect of culture and its impact here on the elections. Film can be a nice escape, maybe from the reality of politics, but not today, as we've talked about. But Beth, you took a look at a few films this week where politics intersect the media and some interesting correlations with what's going on with this campaign season. First of all, we're talking about making history on Tuesday if we do happen to elect a woman president of the United States. But the movies has already been there, right?
They've been there quite a bit, and amusingly, one of the first films that had a woman president, which was in 1964, called Kisses from My President, although it's trying to present this female as president and kind of this women's liberation thing, it was a ridiculous sex comedy where, you know, she becomes president and they say, here's the president's bedroom, and she goes, well, it's not very feminine, is it? And then she walks her husband, Fred McMurray, into the next bedroom, which is the First Lady's bedroom. And he looks at all the lace and all the frilly stuff, and he's like, oh, my God, you can't put me in here. And she's like, well, you can't come in the president's bedroom because I have to work tonight. So it's very much it reflects the sexist attitudes of the 60s, even though it's trying to pretend that it's showing us that a woman could be president.
Well, I mean, how does that play, if at all, on the role that Bill Clinton would have as first gentleman, and of course, a former president himself?
Well, we're hoping that it will be more serious than that, and that he doesn't have to worry about, you know, just what to serve for dinner and whether or not.
He did come up with a cookie recipe, didn't he?
Oh, he did? Bill Clinton did?
I think he did. I believe it was vegan, though. He's
okay.
vegan now, and so it was, you know, by definition, not as good. Sorry for the hate mail.
But there will be I'm sure this will inspire new films if we do have a real first. But we get a lot of first ladies actually in like science fiction films. Independence Day, both films have had female presidents, and we've also had a black president in these science fiction. Like apocalypses tend to bring out minorities for presidents in Hollywood movies, because then they can have white heroes, white male heroes, and feel okay about it.
But the main thing in those films is the president's an important character, but the main thing is whatever terrible threat is coming to take away Earth, right? In those disaster films. Well, there is one film that stands out, certainly to me and a lot of people, with regard to the similarities in the rise of Donald Trump, and that would be Citizen Kane, which is, a lot of people think is the best movie ever. Some people go with The Godfather. But anyway, Citizen Kane, in this, then we're going to play a bite here. Mr. Kane, who was supposed to be a portrayal of William Randolph Hearst in real life, Charles Foster Kane, he's running for governor of New York. And he's really going to lose the election. He's going to go down in flames here. And they've got his newspapers prepared two different headlines for the morning. Let's see what that clip is.
With a million majority already against him, and the church count is still to be heard from, I'm afraid we got no choice.
This one?
That one.
All right, and that one, for those listening on radio, said fraud at the polls. The one headline said Kane wins with a big exclamation point. The other is fraud at the polls here. And we've kind of seen that play out. We've already seen where Mr. Trump has said, if we lose, my goodness, it's got to be rigged, right?
Yeah, the last week with the polls tightening, we've heard a lot less about the polls being rigged, haven't we?
Well, yeah, and we hated the FBI director early on when he cleared Hillary Clinton of any crime, and now all of a sudden we kind of like him after last Friday and his revelation about more emails here. So what else can we take away from films as it relates to politics today? Are we seeing the manipulation of the public and some of the media stuff that we've talked about?
Well, you brought up Twitter and social media. House of Cards did a brilliant job of looking at that with Frank Underwood's campaign, Kevin Spacey, where he has to face off against a Republican candidate who his approach, the Republican candidate decides to use social media, and he's got a lovely family, a gorgeous wife, beautiful children, and he decides to, start doing live feeds and posts about his family and to show how warm they are. Frank has no children, and he and his wife, as ruthless as they are a bit cold to the outward public.
Different generation, they're not playing that game.
So there's a real nice thread going through that about using social media and how he manages to use that to distract the public from, the Republican candidate uses it to distract the public from a scandal that he has.
And I also want to mention in your stories this week, your feature, you talked with Turner Classic Movie host Ben Mankiewicz, and I did want to mention it. You've got your podcast and a whole long interview on that. And you were talking also in that about what this says about American politics. There's another clip we want to throw to here on the making of the movie, The Candidate.
The Candidate.
Right? Yeah.
If we're ever going to tackle the problems of the 1970s, we need all the strength a young man can give. Bill McKay has it. The conviction to push for real solutions to the problems of unemployment, poverty, and crime. The determination to put some action back into the United States Senate. The energy to fight the...
All right, now that was, again, for our radio audience, so that's Robert Redford looking just great in his prime here, very good-looking guy. He was running for Senate in that particular film
looking very much like a Kennedy candidate.
Exactly, and, how did that film show, maybe rather cynically at the base of it, how you can sell people on a certain candidate just with visuals? This
film's amazing. It was made in 1972. It still holds up. It's still so sharp in its commentary. But basically what it's about, even though some of the methods have changed a little bit, it's about how do you package a candidate? How do you make them look? Who do you want them talking to? How do you want them dressed? Cut the sideburns because that's not going to look good. And it's all about the packaging. And this is the case of this film. Robert Redford is drafted to run in this campaign, and his caveat is, well, you get to lose, so you can say anything you want. But even with those terms, suddenly they start to realize, well, you don't want to lose too badly, so you got to soften this and change that. And that is still valid. I mean, the notion of how do you package someone for the public. And, Trump, you may say, like, he may look like a buffoon. You may think that he looks horrible. But he's packaging himself to a particular audience that responds to that image and not the kind of image that, Robert Redford has in this film. But it's a brilliant movie. If you check one out on the Turner Classic Films that they've got running now, that is the one to look at.
That's a very good one. All right, we got one more I wanted to talk to here before we wrap it up today, and this would be on the lighter side here, although this movie has also been brought up in the terms of this campaign. And give us a little background before we show the clip here. And this, of course, the movie I'm talking about is Idiocracy, right? No,
Idiocracy.
Idiocracy.
Yes.
I mispronounced
that. Some people
that.
say it was a reality show.
Right.
The director who made it goes like, I didn't realize I was making a documentary at the time. But basically, this is set in the future where this guy who's pretty dumb is frozen, and he ends up sleeping for hundreds of years. And through this process of, intelligent people aren't having children, people who aren't that smart are having 15 and 20, suddenly America's intelligence level drops. And when this guy's thawed out, he's the smartest man alive.
Even though he's just an average Joe.
He's possibly below average Joe, but yes. And, he wakes up to a place that, doesn't understand you have to water crops to make the plants grow, and they have President Camacho in charge.
They're that dumb. Well, here's his President Camacho's State of the Union bite here.
I got a 3-point plan to fix everything. Break it down. Number one, we got this guy not sure. Number two, he's got a higher IQ than any man alive. And number three, he's gonna fix everything. I give you my word as president.
Well, those are some vague promises there, and maybe not that much unlike what we've heard. What do you think, Andy?
Sounds like the plan that involves punching ISIS in the face.
So a lot of people, as you say, this was a documentary. We're in the middle of idiocracy.
That's what it feels like sometimes. And there was the director who made this was on Twitter talking about his film at one point, and people were just praising him for like, this is a brilliant piece of filmmaking. How did you know this was going to happen?
All right, well, we're going to see on Tuesday if it all does come out. We are out of time, and that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. And I'd like to thank my guests, Andy Keats, a Voice of San Diego, Sarah Libby, also a Voice of San Diego, and Beth Accomando of KPBS News. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. Also at kpbs.org is our voter guide. It's a comprehensive look at all the local, state, and national races, plus the propositions and the measures and everything on Tuesday's ballot. And if you go to Voice of San Diego's website, they have a terrific comprehensive guide as well. Plenty of places to find out information. All you need to know before voting, and please vote on Tuesday. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks very much.